I reviewed their diplomatic files. None of these individuals are listed as politicians or negotiators.
They're all listed as senior operational personnel.
Find out what operational means.
The Velthrani Conclave had requested first formal contact through the Standard Coalition diplomatic framework, submitting the appropriate protocols and expecting what every first contact procedure in the past 2 centuries had produced: a delegation of human administrators, legal representatives, and cultural liaisons arriving in formal attire with briefcases full of documentation frameworks. What descended from the UNPMCU Hercules transport was something the Conclave's first contact preparation briefings had not specifically covered. 43 people. Every one of them in field-worn tactical gear. Every one of them carrying something with a barrel on it. They moved off the ramp in a column with the specific synchronized economy of individuals who had been moving in groups through difficult terrain for so long it had become a biological default rather than a deliberate practice. The lead figure, Commander Dravik Ash, as the manifest eventually clarified, had silver-streaked hair, a jaw that looked like it had been used as a doorstop on several occasions, and the particular quality of stillness that settles over people who have spent sufficient time in environments where stillness determines survival. He held a shotgun along his leg with the practiced comfort of someone who might as well have been carrying a newspaper. The woman directly behind him, Lieutenant Petra Wynne, carried a rifle whose barrel length suggested it was designed for engagement at distances that made most conventional tactical considerations irrelevant. She scanned the assembled conclave delegation with systematic professionalism, her eyes touching each person for exactly long enough to establish the information she wanted before moving to the next. Solvan had been the Velthrani Conclave's first emissary for 14 years. He had conducted formal meetings with 11 different species. He had developed considerable skill at reading body language across radically different physiologies, and what he was currently reading from the human delegation was information he was still processing. They weren't hostile. Solvan was experienced enough to identify genuine threat orientation, and this wasn't it. What he was processing was something more subtle. These were people who had been in hostile environments so frequently, for so long, that their bodies had stopped distinguishing between environments that required readiness and environments that didn't. They were in the same state they were always in. "Commander Ash," Solvan said, offering the formal conclave greeting gesture. "The Velthrani Conclave extends welcome to Earth's delegation." Ash returned a nod, a short, direct acknowledgement that communicated respect without ceremony, the way someone communicates things when ceremony has always been a luxury of situations they don't typically occupy. "Emissary Solvan," Ash said, "we're here to discuss the outer corridor security arrangements you proposed." "We had anticipated a diplomatic team," Solvan said carefully. "This is our diplomatic team," Ash said. What followed, over 3 days of formal consultation in the base's converted conference facilities, was the most efficient diplomatic process the Velthrani Conclave's records documented across any interspecies negotiation. It was efficient because the humans approached the outer corridor security problem the same way they apparently approached everything, by identifying what needed to actually be done, working backward from that endpoint to determine what resources, protocols, and commitments the endpoint required, and then stating those requirements clearly without the decorative ambiguity that interspecies negotiations typically accumulated. "The Kroth incursion routes follow these 3 geometries," Petra said during the second day's working session, indicating corridor vectors on the tactical display with a pointer. "Blocking all 3 requires 2 forward positioning agreements and 1 reciprocal intelligence sharing commitment. The documentation for all 3 can be completed within the day. We'd suggest starting there rather than establishing framework for establishing framework for establishing framework." Solvan's senior aide, who had managed documentation for 4 previous multi-species security arrangements, made a quiet note that the human approach was compressing what typically required 11 weeks of preliminary consultation into 4 hours of direct work session. "You've done this before," Solvan observed during a brief recess. "This kind of corridor security arrangement." 47 times, Ash said, in various configurations. "The geometry changes. The underlying problem doesn't." He poured himself coffee from the thermos he'd apparently brought personally and offered the other cup without fanfare. The Croth are predictable if you've watched them long enough. They use the same 3 insertion geometries because those are the approaches that worked in their historical engagements. They'll keep using them until someone makes those geometries expensive enough that the calculation changes. And making approaches expensive, Solvon said slowly, is something your team has particular expertise in. We're operational personnel, Ash said, with a ghost of something approaching amusement. That's what the manifest says. Solvon considered him across the table, this silver-haired, weapon-comfortable, profoundly unhurried person who had apparently spent decades making things expensive for entities that had miscalculated the difficulty of their chosen approaches. I understand now, Solvon said, why Earth sent this particular delegation. Did you expect politicians? Ash asked. I expected diplomats, Solvon said. We are diplomats, Ash said. We're just diplomats who've spent enough time on the problems that we skip the part where everyone discusses the problems and gets directly to the part where we solve them. The security arrangement was finalized on the afternoon of Day 3, signed with considerably less ceremony than conclave protocol typically required and considerably more genuine mutual confidence than most security arrangements produced. As the Hercules prepared for departure, Petra Wynne performed a final sweep of the conference facilities with the systematic habit of someone who had left equipment behind in difficult locations before and had learned the lesson. Solvon found her in the corridor and said, formally and genuinely, "The conclave thanks Earth for sending its most effective representatives." Petra looked at him with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who communicated straight lines rather than curves. "We're not the most effective," she said. "We're just the ones who've done it longest." She shouldered her rifle and walked toward the tarmac. Solvon watched her go, then spent 20 minutes revising the conclave's standard first contact preparation briefings to include a new category. He titled it, Operational Personnel, Definition and Considerations. It ran considerably longer than he initially anticipated. In the months that followed, the outer corridor remained the quietest sector of Coalition space. The Croth tested the new defenses exactly once, discovered every route already anticipated, and never tried the same approach again. The Velthrani conclave would later teach future diplomats that humanity's greatest negotiators were not always the ones in tailored suits, but often the veterans who had already solved tomorrow's problems yesterday. Commander Ash and his team returned to Earth without speeches or celebration, considering the mission nothing more than another job completed. The conclave, however, never again underestimated what humans meant when they said they were sending their diplomatic team.